My name is Tyson Raper. I'm the cotton and small grain specialist with the University of Tennessee. I'm going to be presenting today on the 2020 and 2021 Extension Cotton Specialist Seed Quality Survey Summary and sharing some field trial results. The slide set that I'm going to present today was provided by Dr. Marilla Maeda. He presented a portion of these slides at the Beltwide Cotton Conferences on January 4th. I want to state that from here on, all the slides that you will see are property of Dr. Maeda, and I very much appreciate his sharing this slide set with me, allowing me to share this the data with you for the Milan no-till meeting.
After a couple of challenging years from a seed quality standpoint, the Extension Cotton Specialists, under the leadership of Dr. Marilla Maeda, began developing a protocol on assessing the seed quality that is commercially available and how that relates to in-field performance. This is a really big project that has a lot of different partners. I mentioned Dr. Marilla Maeda, the Extension Cotton Specialist with Texas A&M. He served as a leader in this effort. He worked very closely with Dr. Galen Morgan at Cotton Incorporated. But we also had buy-in from the seed companies as well. We all recognize that seed quality, generating quality seed can be a challenge, but it's very, very important for the end consumer. And we all benefit from having very, very high quality seed. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the 2020 and 2021 results. There's a lot of different parameters that were collected. There's a lot of different ways to present the data, and I'm going to just really take a snippet, a very, very small subset to share with you today. I do want to point out that we are continuing this work, and I've actually got the trial now in 2022 and plan to have another one in 2023 in a similar setup. The project's changed a little bit. We have another cotton specialist managing it now, Dr. Campan. We've changed a little bit of how we collect the seed, what measurements we're taking in season. But we're continuing to look at seed quality as one of the major potential issues, hurdles, challenges that we have in cotton production in the U.S. So I mentioned earlier that there are a large number of parameters, a lot of data associated with this project, a lot of different partners and moving pieces in the project. The University of North Texas was responsible for collecting the oil and protein data. They also looked at seed index and density, and if you want to understand how those measurements are generated, you can look over there on the right side of the screen. USDA ARS conducted a fatty acid profile. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture was the laboratory that we used to generate worm and cool germ. We also requested information on worm and cool germ, seed size, and visual mechanical damage from the private companies that actually sold the seed. From a university standpoint, and each of the specialists in particular generated field performance data. So we actually took the seed that was going to be analyzed in all these different measurements, and we planted it. And then we looked at performance in season, so we could link the two, link all of this different data together to understand which parameters most likely influence not only early season performance, but ultimately yield. We also had visual mechanical damage collected by Dr. Schneider. In all, we were looking at 52 samples in 2020, 41 in 2021. So when you look at all the different varieties, ultimately it came down to 68 varieties across those 2 years. If you look at all the location and state combinations, in total we had 415 different observations. So this is again a very large project measuring a very, very large number of different parameters. Just to kind of push home the magnitude of this effort, we mentioned that 415 different samples, unique varieties and locations that were tested in that 2020 and 2021 window. If you look at all the different parameters that were collected across that time frame, and those are listed on the top side of the screen: cool germ, warm germ, oil content, all the in-season parameters that are measured, all the other laboratory parameters that I didn't mention. In all, if all of those samples, if we had data for it, it would have been a total of over that 2-year period, 38,595 different points. Um, Not all of that data was able to be collected for each of the different parameters of interest, but we averaged about 71% completeness. And what that basically means is we had 27,000 different data points to consider when we were looking at seed quality. I wanted to make sure that this is presented because there's no way that we could reach the magnitude and be able to pin down, generate as impactful results without the cooperation of not only the seed companies but Cod Incorporated, and having them on board and willing to help sponsor this work really makes a big difference, and helps us basically do a better job, a more thorough job. So our ability to take an assessment that's this large really speaks to the strength of the partnership that we have with Cotton Incorporated. It was not the goal of this project to point fingers at which company was possibly doing a better or worse job on generating high quality seed. We're all in this to improve. So we actually coded the varieties, we coded the company names. So you're not going to hear any company identified specifically. But I do think there are some interesting trends that we can pick up by looking at the coded data. Here we have average oil content graphed by year and company code. And you can clearly see some trends. Now, part of this is likely due to the company. A lot of it's likely going to be due to the varieties that were sold during those years and the consistency from 2020 to 2021. You can clearly see some statistical significant trends and consistency from 2020 to 2021. A few of these companies appear to have higher oil content as opposed to some of the others. It's just an important trend to note. As you might expect, average oil content when graphed against seed size tends to have a positive correlation. This correlation is not always strong, but it occasionally is. And you can look at the strength of those relationships with these R squareds. Anything above a 0.4 or 0.5 would be relatively strong. 0.61 would be quite strong. So we can clearly see oil content decreasing as seed size, and this seed size would be, the larger the number, basically the smaller the seed. This is going to be reported in seed per pound. So we love to see that 4,000, 4,500, even close to 5,000 seed per pound. When we get to that 6,500 or 7,000, that's when we start seeing some real differences in performance, typically in the field. As you might expect, some seed companies typically sell smaller seeded varieties, and we were able to see statistical separations between companies when we combine across years. We've got seed size here. This would be in seed per pound. The larger the number, again, would be smaller seeded. The smaller the number would be larger seeded. And again, separations here on the right side of the screen. It's very clear to see that some of the varieties that these companies are selling tend to run smaller or larger depending on the company. Now we're moving into some of the more interesting data. This is data that was collected in the field. So we actually took a fresh weight 3 weeks after planting, and this is graphed against, again, seed size. So you'll notice all these different lines. These are going to be all the different participating states. Tennessee is represented here. What you can immediately tell is that there's a negative relationship. So basically, if that seed size is larger seeded varieties would be down here. Fresh weight of those plants 3 weeks after planting is generally going to be larger. The smaller the seed, uh, that would mean, generally speaking, uh, the lower the fresh weight 3 weeks after planting. So, based on seed size, we can clearly see some differences in early season performance based on the data we collected in 2020 and 2021. In the next two slides, we actually compared the company reported warm and the North Carolina Department of Ag measured warm, as well as the company reported cool and the North Carolina Department of Ag measured cool. We graphed these two against one another, and on the left side we have company warm germ, and then on the bottom we have NCDA warm. What I wanted to point out here is if the relationship was perfect, if the company reported warm and the NCDA reported warm was the exact same, we would see a cluster that pretty well is perfectly split by the dashed red line. What we actually saw was a little bit of a pool towards the company side. That basically means, on average, the company was reporting a little higher warm germ than NCDA was measuring. We also see this trend actually a little bit more clearly when we look at cool germ than compared to the warm germ, where again the company reported cool germ tends to be a little bit higher than what NCDA is actually measuring. Uh, we're going to look at that data a little bit differently in the next slide. So this is the difference distribution of the company versus the NCDA. What we want to point out here is positive means the company reported is a little bit higher. Negative is going to mean the NCDA was higher. And you can see on both the warm and the cool, the mean is positive. So on average, company was reporting about a 3.6% greater warm germ than NCDA measured. Similarly, just a little bit easier to see would be the cool, and that difference was 7%. Company reported was 7% higher than NCDA measured. Now, I want to add one point here. You may interpret this, oh, well, the company's lying to me. My initial assessment or take home on this wouldn't be that there's malicious intent. Procedures can change from lab to lab. This may be a function of a different lab running the measurement. It is unfortunate that in both of these scenarios, the company reported is greater than what was measured by NCDA, but I don't think that alone can be interpreted as malicious intent. We're going to slice this data again a little bit of a different way. On the upper left panel, we have company reported warm graphed against company reported cool. And you can see a pretty clear correlation there. It looks like we've got a slight slide down as warm germ decreases. We also see a decrease in cool germ, and this is reported by the company. When we looked at the NCDA data, we can see this trend really become even clearer. As warm germ declines, we can clearly see a decrease in cool germ. I want to break this figure down. This is the NCDA reported warm versus cool data. I think there are some very interesting things that could be helpful for us in determining seed quality and selecting the best seed quality for planting. We've got to spend a little time kind of breaking this thing up into panels in order to be able to interpret the data best. And in order to do that, we've drawn some boxes. So I'm going to start with cool germination down here on the bottom. We've got several different boxes that we'll add. But whenever we saw cool germ reported of greater than 80%, warm germ was also always greater than 80%. When we saw cool germ reported of greater than 70%, again, warm germ was always better than 80%. Now, when cool germ fell between 60 and 70%, we saw that almost 7% of the time, warm germ was also going to be less than 80%. And finally, when we saw cool germ between 50 and 60%, almost 25% of the time, warm germ fell below that 80% threshold. Our optimum range for cool germ, we typically say, is 70%. And I think it's very interesting to note that 100% of the samples with a greater than 80% warm germ were also characterized by a greater than 70% cool germ, and that represent this blue box here. So basically, warm and cool appear to be very, very closely correlated, but when we start to slide down into cooler germ, we definitely see warm germ slide as well. A lot of the data that you've seen presented has been pooled across companies, and it's not been variety specific. This is variety specific data presented by company. The difference in the companies would be different colors. We have coded the variety names, so A1, A2, A3, all the A's would be different varieties within the same company. The B's, again, different variety within a different company, different color. I want to spend a little time with this data, and this setup is going to be similar. We're going to hold the varieties the same. We're going to keep the company codes the same. But one thing that we are going to vary is the parameter over here on the left. Initially, we're going to look at the NCDA, reported warm germination rate. And from the samples that we pulled, you can clearly see the majority are above 80%. Now, unfortunately, 32 of the 362 that are graphed here were below 80%, and that penciled out to 88%. And 5 of the 7 companies that we pulled samples from were included in having varieties or having samples that were below that 80% mark. Now, I want to look at the same data from a cool standpoint. So if you noticed, all of these data points that were above the line, a good chunk of those shifted down. Now, some companies appeared to shift down more so than others, but nevertheless, 100 out of 362 tested fell below 60%, and that penciled out to 27.6% of the samples that we collected tested with cool germ below 60. Unfortunately, all 7 of the 7 companies that were sampled had cool germ, at least a sample for cool germ that fell below that 60% mark. Now, what does this mean from an in-field performance standpoint? Again, the data, the warm germ, the cool germ, and then this 7 days after planting percent of the stand that emerged, you can clearly see trends, correlations between that warm and the cool, and then the cool and the actual emergence. You can also see separations by company, and so when the one company typically had lower warm and cool, it also had lower emergence 7 days after planting. When a company had higher warm and cool, they typically saw higher emergence 7 days after planting. It's an important, I think, trend to note. When we look at the percentage of the stand emerged 7 days after planting, 70 out of the 188 samples were below 50% at that 7 day after planting mark, and that basically penciled out to about 40% of the samples. Now, when we move to 10 days after planting, we do see a little bit of a shift back upward above that 50% threshold. It took a little bit longer for some of these varieties to emerge, but by the time we got to that 10 day after planting, 52 out of the 231 sampled were below 50%, and so that number had fallen to around 22% of the samples tested. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that those the points below the line don't have very, very good yield potential still, but based on our data, that yield potential may not be as great as if it would have been above the line. We get a lot of questions in this time frame. I'm recording this now on June 6th. We get a lot of questions in this time frame about, well, my stand's been slow to come up. What's my yield potential? And I think this data here is helpful to understanding potentially that relationship. On the bottom of the graph, we have emergence at 7 days after planting in a percentage. And I want to spend some time just looking at this data for a second. Each one of these different lines is going to be a different location. And you can see the range. Some locations appear to start at 60% and then go all the way up to almost 90%. Some locations start at 7 days after planting had as little as maybe 5 or 8%, and then the range moved up to 60. This location in particular, like it had about 20% of some of those treatments up compared to maybe 50% of some of the other treatments. Generally speaking, we see when we break this down by location, we see those that have more seed up 7 days after planting, those are generally going to be higher yielding. We have yield here on the left side of the graph. That is almost always true. We have the Texas W location where that relationship appears to be just zero, flat. It's actually negative, but it's so very, very slightly negative. I would interpret it as flat. Generally speaking, we see that the varieties, the treatments that emerged quicker generally yielded better. But again, this range at 7 days after planting changes drastically from location to location, and this is absolutely due to environment. What does this mean to you as a grower? Well, at 7 days after planting, if the environment's been poor and you're only looking at 20% emergence, you still have very, very good yield potential. It may take considerably more time for all of those seeds to emerge before you get to that 50, 60, 70% emergence. But that in itself, based on some of this data, would indicate you still have very, very good yield potential. Some of the extremes would be located at this location where, and this is going to be reported likely in kilograms per hectare, but several of these locations have 25% emerged at 7 days after planting, and we're still looking at very, very high yield potential. Again, to just kind of push that idea forward, make that point a little bit more clear, we have 10 days after planting, we've got the percentage of plants emerged versus seed cotton yield. Again, we have a large number of locations that have very, very low levels of emergence in some of their treatments, and we can still see typically a positive correlation, but this trend has begun to flatten by 10 days after planting. What does that mean? Basically, when we're trying to predict yield or yield potential, emergence at 10 days after planting does not appear to be a very, very important parameter. At this point, if those seedlings have emerged, likely some other parameter like variety could dominate that prediction, not necessarily stand count. So, and this again goes back to the ability of cotton to compensate. The stand 10 days after planting, while we'd like to have every seedling up, it's not absolutely critical. We still may have very, very good yield potential with some of those thinner stands. Now, I have skimmed this data set to just kind of hit some of the high points, but I do want to point out one other analysis that's currently ongoing. Dr. Marilla Maeda is tackling this from a modeling standpoint. So he's basically started pooling all of the data together to see if he can correlate quality parameters with field performance. And I'm not gonna dive into this analysis, but I do want to draw your attention to it. Again, a very large sample set, over 283 samples. He's looking at the response variables of fresh weight, stand count at 7 days after planting, stand count at 10 days after planting, seed cotton yield, and then the control variables are state, seeding rate, soil temp at planting, and then soil temp 1 day after planting. So really excited to have Dr. Maeda working on this project and looking forward to seeing some of the final results from this analysis.
Dr. Maeda is working on developing a publication to summarize all of these results and generate some real key takeaways. I want to share a few with you, though, that become very clear to me in the process of this research. First of all, the warm and cool germ are clearly correlated, and I'm interested in the warm number, but I'm more interested in the cool number. I want to see numbers greater than 70%. If you see those numbers, you're likely looking at high quality seed. I also want to encourage you to request this information from your seed source. There's no reason for you not to have this information. Knowledge is power, especially from a seed quality standpoint. Could help you better place these varieties in different planting windows. So I would encourage you to request this information. I would love to see this become a very standard parameter reported almost all the time from each of the seed companies. I also want to point out that if it's slow to emerge, it's not necessarily a concern if the environment has been challenging. Now, what we typically become very concerned is when we have adequate soil moisture, warm temperatures, and yet we still see seed that was properly placed taking longer than 10, potentially even 14 days to emerge. That would indicate a problem. I'm not terribly concerned if we're at that 10 to even the 14-day mark if it's been very adverse conditions. We've seen quite a bit of that in 2022. The last thing I'll point out is watch seed size. Some of these varieties tend to have smaller seeds. Larger seeds within a given variety are generally going to be more vigorous. We showed that relationship with fresh weight collected after planting. If given the option, we always want to select a lot that has larger seed size. And again, having that knowledge, paying attention to that number reported on the bag could help you better place varieties and lots within a given variety throughout our relatively challenging planting windows. Again, I want to thank Dr. Marilla Maeda, number one, for sharing this slide set, but more than that, for organizing and collecting, analyzing all of the data that has been reported from all of these different organizations. Appreciate Cotton Incorporated for sponsoring this work. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions whatsoever about the content that was covered today. Thank you.